My son charged me $5,000 a month in rent. I was working 3 jobs while he and my daughter-in-law lived in my house like royalty. That was the day I realized the people I had sacrificed everything for saw me as nothing more than a paycheck. It is a sentence that still burns when I say it out loud, because it was not just about the money. It was about betrayal, about the kind of cruelty only those closest to you can wield with such precision. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The day he told me I would need to start paying rent in the home I had built with my own hands, I felt something inside me splinter. The man I raised, the boy I carried on my shoulders and worked myself to the bone to provide for, looked me straight in the eyes and demanded $5,000 a month as though I were a stranger, a tenant, a burden. I remember the moment in perfect detail. He sat at the kitchen table with his wife beside him, her manicured fingers drumming against her phone, her lips curling into that little smirk she always wore when she thought she had the upper hand. My son cleared his throat, spoke in that condescending tone he had picked up from her, and said, "Dad, times are tough. We can't keep covering all the expenses here. From now on, you'll need to pay $50 in rent every month if you want to stay in this house." It was not a suggestion. It was not even a conversation. It was an ultimatum. My daughter-in-law leaned forward then, her voice syrupy but sharp, adding, "It's only fair. We've got our own lives to think about now. Only fair." Those words rattled around in my skull like broken glass. Only fair? After I had worked double shifts, weekends, holidays, after I had given him everything he ever asked for, after I had handed them the very roof over their heads without question, I stared at them, struggling to find words. My throat felt tight, my palms damp, and for a long moment I thought I might collapse right there at the table. I wanted to ask him if he remembered the long nights when I came home with aching muscles and swollen feet just so he could have his first car. I wanted to ask him if he remembered how I sold my tools, my most precious belongings, to help him through college when scholarships weren't enough. But instead, I just nodded, because the shock of the moment froze me. My hand trembled slightly as I folded the bill he had left on the table, a neatly printed list of shared household costs that added up to that staggering 50 figure. It was more than rent on half the houses in town. It was a number chosen not out of necessity, but out of greed, a test to see how much I would endure. That night, lying awake on the stiff mattress in the small guest room they had shoved me into, I could still hear their voices echoing. "It's only fair," she had repeated with a laugh, as if squeezing me dry was a joke. "Dad's still working. He can handle it." They spoke as though I were not a human being, not a father, but a resource to be mined until there was nothing left. I stared at the ceiling until morning, my chest hollow, the silence pressing down on me heavier than any factory shift or late-night delivery run. In that silence, a single thought grew louder and louder. This was not just disrespect, it was war. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And though I did not know it then, their demand for $5,000 would set in motion something they could never have anticipated. I built that house with my own 2 hands. Every brick, every nail, every board carried a piece of me. I still remember the summer sun blistering my skin as I laid the foundation, the nights when I worked by lantern light because I couldn't afford to hire contractors. I was younger then, stronger, but already carrying the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. I wanted my son to grow up with more than I ever had. I wanted him to wake each morning in a home filled with stability, not fear of eviction, not the uncertainty I had known as a child. Every overtime shift, every calloused palm, every aching bone was part of that promise. I gave my body to that house so he could have a future. When he was small, he would run through the empty rooms while I hammered away at the walls. His laughter echoed in the half-built frame, and even when exhaustion tugged at my muscles, the sound gave me strength. I worked long hours at the factory, then came home and worked on the house. I remember falling asleep with sawdust in my hair, steel-toe boots still on my feet. My paychecks were stretched so thin they were nearly transparent, but I always made sure there was food on the table, clothes on his back, and money for his school trips. When he looked up at me with those innocent eyes and said, "Thank you, Dad," I believed it was worth it. I believed he saw the sacrifices. College came faster than I expected. He wanted to study business, and the costs were more than I could manage. But I refused to let him see the fear in my eyes when the tuition bills arrived. I sold my old pickup. I pawned the watch my father left me. I cut back on meals when no one was looking. I took night shifts hauling boxes and weekends mopping floors at the grocery store. Each time the tuition deadline loomed, I found a way. He graduated without debt, walking across that stage in a cap and gown while I sat in the audience, my chest swelling with pride. I clapped until my hands burned, tears streaming down my face. All I could think was, I did it. I gave him the chance I never had. When he fell in love, I opened my wallet again. Weddings are expensive, but he wanted something grand, something that would impress her family. I told myself it was his once-in-a-lifetime day, and I would not let him down. I took out a loan I could barely afford, just so the reception hall gleamed with chandeliers and the tables overflowed with food. I remember sitting in the back corner that night, watching them twirl across the dance floor under soft lights. I was tired, so tired, but I thought to myself, he's happy. That's all that matters. When they thanked me, briefly, in a speech written more for appearances than for gratitude, I smiled anyway. After they married, I welcomed her into the house as though she were my own. I thought she was family now, someone who would cherish what we had built together. I gave them the master bedroom, the space with the best light and the largest closet. I told myself I was just an old man, that my place was in the smaller rooms as long as they were comfortable. When they wanted new furniture, I helped move it in. When they needed repairs, I pulled out my worn tools and got to work. I kept giving, pouring myself into their comfort, convincing myself that love and loyalty would be enough repayment. But those memories now twist inside me like a knife. Every sacrifice I made, every drop of sweat that darkened the floorboards, every dollar I scraped together to support him through school, every debt I shouldered for his wedding, it all feels like it was invisible to him. He never saw the years of back-breaking labor. He never noticed the nights I went without sleep so he could have a future. Instead, he looked at me across that kitchen table and saw only an opportunity to squeeze me for more. The boy I had raised on my shoulders, the man I had celebrated as he became a husband, had forgotten, or worse, discarded everything I had done. And it was in that realization, remembering every sacrifice I had made, that the weight of betrayal pressed even heavier on my chest. The first confrontation is burned into my memory like a scar that will never fade. It happened just days after they had dropped the demand for rent. When I finally tried to reason with them, I sat at the same kitchen table I had built decades ago, its wood still sturdy despite the years. That table had seen birthday cakes, family dinners, and the laughter of my son when he was small. But on that day, it became a battlefield. My son leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his jaw set in that stubborn way that once reminded me of determination but now reeked of arrogance. His wife sat beside him, her expression smooth and rehearsed, like someone preparing for a performance. "Dad, you have to understand," he said, his voice low and measured, the kind of tone meant to sound rational but sharpened by superiority. $5,000 isn't unreasonable. The mortgage, the utilities, the upkeep, it all adds up. You've been living here without contributing enough. It's time you start pulling your weight. Pulling my weight. As if 3 jobs and decades of sacrifice meant nothing. As if the roof over their heads, the one I had built brick by brick, had simply appeared out of thin air. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice calm. "This is my house," I said slowly, the words tasting strange in my mouth. "I built it. I've maintained it. I've given you both everything I could. How can you stand there and tell me I haven't contributed enough?" That's when she leaned forward, her smile practiced, her nails tapping on the table like tiny hammers driving the message in. "You've done a lot, sure," she said smoothly, "but we're not kids anymore. We have bills, we have responsibilities, and it's not fair for us to carry you on top of everything else. You're retired now, aren't you? Shouldn't you be grateful we're letting you stay here instead of moving somewhere smaller?" The word grateful sliced through me. Grateful for being allowed to remain in the home I had built with my sweat and blood. My voice faltered, but I managed to say, "I work 3 jobs. I'm not sitting around. I've never been a burden to you." Her laugh was soft and dismissive, the kind of laugh people use when they don't even bother to hide their contempt. 3 jobs, deliveries and night shifts, that's not the same as a real career. We're the ones holding this family together financially. You should stop pretending otherwise. I looked at my son, hoping for even the slightest defense, some reminder of the boy who once held my hand when crossing the street. But he only shrugged. "She's right, Dad. We're not trying to be cruel. It's just the reality. You're not young anymore, and you can't keep up like before. We've taken on more than enough, and if you can't handle it, maybe you should consider other arrangements." Other arrangements. The phrase dripped with menace, though he tried to dress it in casual detachment. I understood exactly what he meant. I was not welcome here unless I paid the ransom they called rent. My chest tightened as I listened to their words. I wanted to shout, to tell them that every tile in this kitchen was laid with my own hands, that the very table we sat at was carved from wood I had saved for years to buy. I wanted to scream that their lives of ease and comfort existed only because I had spent decades wearing myself down to nothing. But the words caught in my throat, and instead I sat there in silence, my heart pounding against my ribs like a drum. In that silence, they grew bolder. $5,000 a month, she repeated, her tone almost gleeful. "It's a fair price, really. If you were renting anywhere else, it would be more. We're actually giving you a good deal. A good deal." As though they were landlords and I was just some stranger begging for a roof. My son nodded, as if her twisted logic was undeniable. "Exactly. Don't think of it as us taking advantage. Think of it as us being generous. Generous." The word rang in my ears until I thought I might choke on it. In that moment, I saw them clearly for the first time. They didn't see me as a father. They didn't see me as family. I was a liability, an obstacle, a source of money they could bleed dry under the guise of fairness. And in their eyes, I would never be anything more than that. That night, Their words replayed in my mind like a cruel song on endless repeat. You should be grateful we're letting you stay. You're not pulling your weight. $5,000 a month is fair. I lay in the darkness of the small guest room, the shadows stretching long across the walls, and I couldn't shut them out. Every phrase echoed louder than the last, until it felt like the silence itself was mocking me. My chest ached, as if each word had left a bruise deep inside, a wound no one could see but that bled all the same. I turned onto my side, then onto my back, restless, the sheets twisted around my legs. The mattress sagged beneath me, far from the comfort of the bed I had once shared with my late wife, far from the warmth of a space that had felt like mine. Now even this house seemed foreign, hostile, as though it had been stolen from me while I stood helplessly by. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks I had once patched with my own hands, and wondered how everything had gone so wrong. I thought of my son's face, the flat expression as he looked at me, not with love, not even with pity, but with calculation. When had his eyes turned so cold? I tried to pinpoint the moment, to rewind through the years and find the first sign of rot. Had it been at the wedding, when he brushed off my exhaustion as nothing? Had it been in college, when he stopped calling unless he needed money? Or had it always been there, hidden behind the smile of a boy I so badly wanted to believe was grateful? The questions tore at me like claws, each one without an answer. Sleep never came. Instead, memories did. I remembered nights spent in the factory, the sound of machines pounding as I worked double shifts to pay his tuition. I remembered the day I sold my father's watch, the one piece of him I had left just to cover his rent during his final semester. I remembered the hollow ache in my stomach when I skipped meals so I could save enough for his wedding, and now, after everything, he sat across from me and called me a burden. The ingratitude was more painful than any physical wound. At one point, I rose and walked to the window. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Through the glass, I could see the lawn, still neatly trimmed, the fence still standing strong. I had built that fence myself when he was just a boy, to keep him safe when he played in the yard. How bitterly ironic it felt now that the same house meant to protect him was being used to cage me in. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, trying to steady my breath, but the tears came anyway. They rolled hot down my cheeks, and I hated myself for letting them fall. Maybe I am a burden, I whispered into the night, though even as the words left my lips, another voice inside me screamed in protest. Was I really? Hadn't I carried this family for decades? Hadn't I been the one to build, to pay, to provide? And yet, because I was old, because I no longer fit into their idea of usefulness, I was now disposable. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms, the sting sharp enough to anchor me. Their laughter came back to me then, faint but undeniable. I had overheard it earlier that evening, after the confrontation. They thought I was asleep when I heard her say, "He'll pay it. He always caves. He's too weak to do anything else." And his voice, my son's voice, agreeing, "Yeah, it's easy money. He should just be thankful we haven't sent him packing." The cruelty in those words lodged itself deep in my chest. I lay back down, staring once more at the ceiling. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to rest. The wound inside me throbbed with every remembered word, every laugh, every casual dismissal of my worth. I realized then that heartbreak isn't loud or sudden, it's quiet. It's the silence that fills a room after someone tells you you're nothing. It's the emptiness left behind when those you love show you exactly what you mean to them. And in that silence, something shifted inside me. I didn't know it yet, but the disbelief and pain that kept me awake that night were only the beginning. Beneath the wound, beneath the heartbreak, something else began to stir, something colder, sharper, and far stronger than the pain. Morning bled into night, and night bled into morning again. My life became a cycle of endless work, a carousel of exhaustion that never slowed. 3 jobs kept me moving, kept me upright, but only barely. I delivered newspapers before dawn, the chill biting into my skin as I dragged my tired legs down empty streets. After that, I rushed to the grocery store, where I mopped floors and hauled boxes until my back screamed for mercy. At night, I drove deliveries, my eyes heavy, my hands stiff on the steering wheel as headlights blurred and the world around me seemed to fade. By the time I stumbled home, my body was little more than a shell, but there was no rest waiting for me there. I could hear them in the evenings, laughing in the living room, glasses clinking as they toasted to another dinner delivered from the finest restaurants in town. The smell of rich meals wafted through the house, steaks, seafood, bottles of wine that cost more than what I made in a single shift. My stomach often clenched at the scent, reminding me of the sandwich crusts I had eaten alone in the car between deliveries. Once, I came home and found the trash can overflowing with takeout bags, glossy boxes with logos from upscale places I could never afford. I stared at the pile of waste, each bag a reminder that while I scraped my dignity together penny by penny, they lived as if money fell from the sky. They had new clothes, too. Boxes arrived at the door almost daily, expensive brands stamped in bold letters. She paraded around the house in designer dresses, dripping in jewelry I had never seen before. My son wore tailored suits, his shoes polished so brightly they reflected the light. Meanwhile, my own work boots had holes in the soles, and my shirts were frayed at the collar. I washed them at night, hanging them to dry in the bathroom, praying they would hold together for another week. Humiliation became a constant companion. At the grocery store, younger employees looked at me with pity when they saw my trembling hands struggle to lift heavy crates. On deliveries, customers eyed me like I was invisible, just another old man clinging to work he should have retired from years ago. Once, a boy no older than 20 handed me a $2 tip and said, "You remind me of my grandpa. Shouldn't you be at home resting?" I forced a smile, but inside his words cut deep. Resting, as if I had any choice. As if home was a place of rest for me anymore. At night, I drove through neighborhoods filled with glowing houses, couples sitting together on porches, families eating dinner around tables. I thought of my own family, of the son who now treated me like a tenant, of the daughter-in-law who smiled while calling me a burden. The loneliness pressed down harder than the weight of the packages in my trunk. I clenched the steering wheel, trying to stay awake, every mile stretching longer than the last. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, and I barely recognized the man staring back. Hollow eyes, sagging skin, shoulders bent forward from years of labor. He looked like someone already half broken, but still forced to march forward. The worst part was returning home. I would step into the house, my body aching, clothes damp with sweat, and there they would be, lounging on the couch. The television glowed, laughter rang, wine glasses sparkled. They barely glanced at me. Once, she tossed her empty glass in the sink and said, "You're late. We thought you'd be back with groceries." No, thank you. No acknowledgement of the work that had drained the last of my strength. Just expectation, demand, dismissal. I collapsed into bed most nights, still in my uniform, too tired to change. My body would throb as though my bones themselves were rebelling, but sleep was shallow and restless. Their voices carried through the walls, muffled laughter and clinking glasses, while I lay staring at the ceiling, wondering how much longer I could endure. 3 jobs, endless hours, a life reduced to servitude in my own home. And the cruelest irony was that no matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I sacrificed, it was never enough for them. They wanted more. They always wanted more. And as I dragged myself through another night, humiliation burning hotter than exhaustion, I began to feel something shift beneath the weight of it all. Pain and fatigue had dulled me, but somewhere deep inside, something else was starting to wake. It was late, long past midnight, when I came home from another punishing delivery shift. My legs felt like lead, my arms heavy as though I carried the whole world on them. I moved quietly through the house, careful not to wake anyone, though I knew they were often still awake at this hour. The light from the living room spilled faintly into the hallway, and as I passed by, I froze. Their voices carried clearly, sharp and unguarded, and in that moment I became invisible in my own home. I stopped, my back pressed against the wall, my breath held tight in my chest. At first, I thought maybe they were arguing, but then I heard her laugh. Not the polite laugh she used in public, but a cruel, throaty sound that sliced through the silence. "Can you believe him?" she said, amusement dripping from every word. "He actually looked offended when we told him the rent, like he deserves to stay here for free just because he hammered some nails decades ago." "As a most," my son chuckled, the sound low but cutting, a sound that once meant joy to me but now twisted into mockery. "Yeah, he acts like he's entitled to this place just because he put in a little sweat. Please, we're the ones carrying all the real responsibilities now. He should be grateful we haven't kicked him out already." Grateful. That word again. It rang in my ears, bitter and relentless. I clenched my fists so hard my nails bit into my palms, but I couldn't move. I couldn't stop listening, even as each word tore deeper into me. She spoke again, her tone sharper, crueler. "Honestly, he's old baggage, dead weight. I don't know why we didn't make this arrangement sooner. $5,000 a month. He'll pay it. He always caves. He's too weak to do anything else." Old baggage. Weak. The word struck me harder than any blow. My son's voice followed, cold and casual. "Exactly. And if he can't manage it, then we'll just push him to find somewhere else. Maybe a retirement home. He doesn't realize how lucky he is to even be here." I felt something shatter inside me. I wanted to storm into the room to scream that I wasn't baggage, that I wasn't weak. I wanted to remind him of the nights I carried him to bed when he was sick, of the times I worked until my hands bled so he could have everything he wanted. I wanted to make him remember, but I didn't move. I stayed rooted to the spot, silent, because I knew it wouldn't matter. They had already erased me in their hearts. Their laughter echoed through the hall, rising and falling like a cruel symphony. They clinked their glasses together, toasting to their own arrogance, mocking the very man who had given them everything. "Imagine," she said between fits of laughter, "an old man working 3 jobs just to keep up. It's pathetic, pathetic." The word stung because I had thought it myself in quiet moments when I looked in the mirror and saw how haggard I had become. But hearing it from them, from the people I had sacrificed everything for, made it unbearable. My heart pounded in my chest, my throat tight, my body trembling with the effort not to break down right there. I slipped away then, moving silently down the hall like a ghost in my own home. In the darkness of my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands. They were scarred, calloused, proof of a lifetime of labor. These hands had built this house, had fed them, had protected them, and now, to them, those same hands meant nothing. The words wouldn't stop circling in my head. Old baggage, weak, pathetic. They laughed as though I were less than human, as though my existence was nothing but a joke. I pressed my hands to my face, my breath ragged, my chest tight. It was no longer just pain I felt. Something colder spread through me, steady and deliberate, like ice forming on a still pond. In that moment, as their laughter echoed faintly down the hall, I knew something had changed. I had seen the truth, heard it in their own words. They didn't just see me as a burden. They saw me as worthless. And though it broke me, though it cut me deeper than anything before, it also lit a spark. I would never forget what I heard that night, and I would never forgive it. The house has always been more than wood and stone to me. It was the embodiment of every dream I ever dared to have, the vessel of my sweat, my hope, and my love. I remember when the land was nothing but uneven dirt and weeds, when everyone around me said I was crazy to think I could build a home there. I didn't have much money, but I had determination, and I had these hands, calloused, scarred, but steady. I spent weekends digging trenches, leveling the ground, pouring the first concrete with a wheelbarrow I borrowed from a neighbor. In the early days, the frame rose slowly. I would come home from long shifts, bone-weary, and still head straight to the lot with my tools. There were nights when the moon was my only light, when I hammered nails by lantern glow, when I pushed through pain so sharp it made my vision blur. Each board I lifted into place was more than construction. It was a promise to myself and to my son that he would never know the insecurity and fear that haunted my childhood. I can still see him running through the unfinished skeleton of the house, his laughter ringing out as he darted between beams. "This is my room, right, Dad?" he would shout, his voice full of excitement. And I would smile, nodding, saying yes, that room would be his. I pushed harder each time I saw that joy in his eyes. The blisters on my hands, the aching in my back, it all felt worth it when I imagined him sleeping safely in a room built by my love. By the time the roof was finished, I thought I might collapse for good. My body was breaking down, but the sight of shingles in neat rows above us filled me with pride I can't put into words. I worked overtime at the factory to pay for plumbing and wiring, skipping meals so I could buy tiles and insulation. My wife, God rest her soul, would bring me water and sandwiches, urging me to take breaks I never took. She told me often that the house was as much a part of me as my own skin, and she was right. I painted the walls myself, one by one. I laid the floorboards, smoothed the plaster, and even built the kitchen table that now sits between me and my ungrateful son. Every corner, every nail, every stone carries a memory of my labor. This house is not just a shelter, it is my life's work. And now, to stand here decades later, to hear my son and his wife laugh about charging me rent, to be called a burden in the home I bled to build, it is a betrayal so deep it twists my stomach. Each memory of building this house has turned sour. When I look at the walls, I don't just see paint. I see nights of hunger, hours of pain, the sacrifices that left scars on my body. When I look at the fence, I don't just see wood. I see protection, safety, love, and all of it feels tainted now because the very people who should have treasured it treat it as nothing but leverage. I remember the day we first moved in. My son's eyes widened as he walked through the finished rooms, his footsteps echoing on the polished floorboards. He told me, "Dad, You built us a castle. I smiled then, pride swelling in my chest, because I believed I had done something good, something lasting. But looking back now, I wonder if he ever meant those words, or if they were just fleeting gratitude from a child too young to understand. The house stands solid still, but my feelings toward it have crumbled. Where once it symbolized love and triumph, it now feels like a monument to exploitation. My own son sits in the master bedroom I once built for my wife and me, his wife draped in comfort bought with my sacrifice, and I am shoved into a guest room like an unwanted tenant. The betrayal is sharper because I can see, at every turn, the evidence of what I gave. I run my hand along the wall sometimes, feeling the cool paint under my fingertips, and I think, this house was supposed to be my gift to him. Now it is the very weapon he uses to wound me. And that, more than anything, is the deepest cut. There comes a moment when pain transforms into something else. It doesn't vanish, it hardens, reshaping itself into steel. For weeks, I carried the weight of their words on my back like an invisible load. Old baggage, burden, pathetic. Each insult burrowed deeper into me, feeding the ache I already lived with. I had tried to reason with myself, to excuse their cruelty. Maybe they were stressed. Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe I was overreacting. But those lies collapsed under the truth that had been staring me in the face all along. They didn't see me as a father. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as money. It hit me one night when I came home from the third shift, my body trembling from exhaustion. I walked into the kitchen and found them sitting at the table, papers spread out in front of them. I thought perhaps they were paying bills, finally taking responsibility for the house. But no, it was a list of vacations, resorts, cruise packages. I heard her voice as I entered, light and careless. Once we get his next rent payment, we can book the trip, somewhere exclusive. We deserve it. She said it without shame, without even lowering her voice. My son nodded, pen in hand, circling prices like a child picking candy from a jar. He looked up briefly when I walked in, offered me a hollow smile, and went back to planning his getaway. The money I broke my body to earn, the money pulled from the marrow of my bones, was nothing more than fuel for their pleasure. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't their father. I wasn't even a man in their eyes. I was an ATM with worn hands and a tired face, a resource to drain until it was empty. The realization burned hot in my chest, but something else rose beneath it. A cold, quiet certainty. I had wasted too many nights staring at the ceiling, drowning in hurt and disbelief. It was time for something different. The grief still pulsed in me, but beneath it was a steady current of resolve. They thought I was weak, too old, too broken to fight back. They believed their mockery, their laughter, their demands would crush me until I gave in completely. But they didn't know me anymore. They had forgotten the man who built this house from dirt and stone, who worked double shifts and sold his own treasures to see them thrive. They had mistaken patience for weakness, love for submission, and they would learn just how wrong they were. That night, I sat alone in the guest room, staring at the walls I had painted decades ago. I could almost hear my wife's voice, gentle and steady, reminding me of my strength. She had always said I was tougher than I gave myself credit for, that nothing could break me completely. I held on to that memory like a lifeline. The hurt was still raw, but it no longer consumed me. It sharpened me. It gave me focus. I thought of every sacrifice, every meal skipped, every hour of labor, every dollar handed over, and then I thought of their laughter, the cruel words whispered when they believed I couldn't hear. The scales tipped inside me. Love had built this family, but it would not save it now. I whispered to myself, enough. The word felt heavy in the air, final and absolute. I would not give them another drop of my strength without a fight. I would not let them strip me of my dignity, not after everything I had endured. If they wanted to see me as nothing more than money, then I would use money to destroy the illusion of their power. I didn't have the plan yet, but I had the will. And sometimes, will is the sharpest weapon of all. They had pushed me past the breaking point, and though they believed they had won, they had only awakened something far stronger than they could imagine. The man they mocked as weak, as baggage, as pathetic, he was gone. In his place stood someone colder, steadier, and ready to take back everything they had tried to steal. Once the resolve settled in me, it grew like roots digging into the earth. I carried the same routine work, exhaustion, humiliation, but beneath the surface, I was no longer just enduring. I was planning. They thought I was blind, too beaten down to resist. But every cruel word they spoke, every smug smile they gave me, only fed the fire inside. I began to look at them not as my family, but as opponents. And opponents could be studied, outmaneuvered, defeated. The first step was knowledge. I had spent my life building, working, scraping by, but I had never looked closely at the fine print of ownership, inheritance, or legal protections. That ignorance had left me vulnerable. No longer. I began visiting the library after work, using the free computers to research property laws, tenants' rights, and asset protections. I read late into the night, articles blurring before my tired eyes, but I forced myself to push on. The words weren't easy, full of legal jargon and cold terminology, but I began to piece them together like bricks in a wall. What I found surprised me. For all their arrogance, for all their talk of responsibility, my son and his wife had left themselves open. The house, the one I had built and paid for, still legally belonged to me. My name was the one on the deed. Their claim of ownership, their talk of covering expenses, was smoke and mirrors. They could demand rent, they could humiliate me with words, but the law had not yet erased me. That knowledge lit a spark in my chest. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. But knowledge alone wasn't enough. I needed guidance. Quietly, without telling a soul, I made an appointment at a local legal aid office. I still remember walking in, shoulders bent, hands trembling slightly as I held the folder of documents I had kept all these years. The receptionist barely glanced at me, but when I finally sat across from the lawyer, a woman no older than my son, she listened. I explained what was happening, my voice low, ashamed to even admit the truth aloud. She didn't laugh. She didn't dismiss me. Instead, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "You still have options." Those words struck me harder than any insult my son had thrown. Options. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't finished. Together, we reviewed the deed, the mortgage records, the bills. She pointed out strategies, ways to secure the house, ways to shield my income, ways to ensure they couldn't simply toss me aside like trash. It was overwhelming at first, the sheer complexity of it all, but I absorbed it piece by piece, committing it to memory. Every note I scribbled down felt like a weapon being forged in secret. At home, I played the part of the beaten old man. I handed over rent when demanded, bowed my head, kept my silence. They believed they had broken me, and that belief became my disguise. Behind closed doors, though, I was building. I researched late into the night, running my fingers across old documents, practicing what I would say when the time came. I learned about trusts, about asset transfers, about how easily the facade of power could crumble with the right signature in the right place. Sometimes as I studied, I would hear their laughter drifting down the hall. They mocked me openly now, confident in their control. "He'll never leave," she would say. "He needs us too much," my son would reply. "Exactly. He's got nowhere else to go. He'll just keep paying." Their arrogance blinded them. They thought they knew me, but they only knew the man who had tolerated everything for the sake of peace. They didn't see the man who had rebuilt his life from nothing before. They didn't see the hidden strength they had awakened by pushing me too far. Each night, as I closed my notebook and tucked away the papers, I looked around the room I had built decades ago. The walls no longer felt like a cage. They felt like allies, witnesses to what was coming. My hurt was still there, sharp and deep, but it no longer controlled me. In its place stood a quiet determination, steady and cold. They had underestimated me, and that would be their undoing. The first time I walked into the lawyer's office, I felt like an imposter. The lobby was polished and modern, with leather chairs and framed certificates glinting on the walls. I shuffled inside in my worn boots, carrying a folder so old the edges had begun to curl. My hand shook slightly as I clutched it to my chest. I had worked construction sites, factory floors, grocery aisles, but never had I stepped into a place like this on my own behalf. Still, I knew this was a step I had to take. The receptionist looked up from her computer, polite but distracted, and pointed me toward a seat. I sat quietly, my heart hammering, wondering if I would be dismissed, laughed at, or told that my situation was hopeless. I had heard those cruel words enough at home. After a few minutes, the lawyer appeared. She was young, younger than my son, but there was something steady in her posture, something sharp in her eyes. She extended her hand. "Mr. Harris, I'm Ms. Keller. Please, come in." Her office was neat, papers stacked in precise order, diplomas lined behind her desk. I lowered myself into the chair across from her, my folder clutched tightly. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat felt dry, the weight of shame pressing down on me. She noticed, but didn't rush me. Instead, she said gently, "Take your time. Tell me what's going on." So I did. I told her about my son, about the rent demands, about the cruel laughter I overheard. My voice cracked more than once, and at times I stared down at my hands just to keep from breaking. When I finished, I slid the folder across her desk. Inside were the documents I had saved for decades, the deed to the house, the mortgage receipts, the property taxes paid in my name. She opened it, flipping carefully through the pages, her expression unreadable. I braced myself for dismissal, for some confirmation that I was, in fact, powerless. But instead, she looked up and said the words that would change everything. "Mr. Harris, this is your house. Legally, there's no question. Your name is on every record. They can demand whatever they like, but they have no legal authority to evict you, let alone charge you rent." I sat in stunned silence. The words hit me like a beam of light in a cave I thought I would never escape. My house, still mine. No matter what venom they spat at me, the law said otherwise. I leaned forward, my voice trembling. "So, what can I do? I don't want them to take everything I've built. I don't want to leave with nothing." Her gaze sharpened, but there was no pity in it, only resolve. "You have options. You can transfer the house into a trust, which would protect it from being used against you. You can create a will that ensures they won't inherit a dime unless you want them to. You can even take legal steps to force them out, if it comes to that. The important thing is that you are not powerless. You still hold control. I swallowed hard, the tightness in my chest beginning to ease. For weeks, I had felt like a ghost haunting my own life, but here was someone telling me I still mattered, that I still had choices. I asked her question after question, scribbling notes until my hand cramped. She answered each one calmly, with precision, as though she had already anticipated my fears. By the time our meeting ended, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Strength. Not the kind of strength that lifted bricks or carried boxes, but the kind of strength that came from knowing the truth, from holding a weapon my son and his wife didn't even realize I possessed. As I left her office, I glanced at the reflection in the glass doors. I still looked tired, old, worn, but behind my eyes there was a spark. For the first time in months, I walked with my head a little higher. They thought they had reduced me to nothing more than a tenant, but with the help of Ms. Keller, I was becoming something else entirely. I was becoming the man who would take back what was his. When I returned to Ms. Keller's office for the second meeting, I was no longer the hesitant old man who shuffled in with a folder clutched to his chest. I was still weary, yes, but now I carried something I hadn't in a long time. A sense of purpose. She greeted me with the same calm professionalism as before, sliding a fresh stack of documents across the desk. "This," she said, tapping the top sheet, "is how we protect you." And bidden, he carded and it. She began to explain in detail, her words steady and precise. "Your house is legally yours, but if you want to ensure they can't manipulate you or lay claim to it in the future, we need to restructure the ownership. The best option is to place the property into a trust. That way, control shifts completely to you as trustee. They won't be able to demand rent, they won't be able to sell it out from under you, and when you pass, it will only go to whomever you choose, not them, unless you want it." I leaned forward, hanging on every word. A trust. I had heard the term before but never understood what it meant. She explained how it worked, how the law recognized the trust as an entity separate from me, one that could not be manipulated by outsiders. "Think of it as a shield," she said. "They can shout and threaten, but legally they'll hit a wall." As she spoke, I imagined my son's face when he realized his control was nothing but smoke. I pictured the smug smile slipping away, the anger rising when he saw the truth written in black and white. For the first time, the image made me smile not in cruelty but in quiet vindication. Ms. Keller continued, showing me how to draft a will that cut them out entirely. "You don't have to leave them anything," she said firmly. "You can choose friends, charities, even distant relatives, people who would value what you've worked for, not exploit it. You decide who inherits your legacy." Her words carried weight, and I felt the gravity of choice pressing against me. For so long, I had assumed everything I built would go to my son, because that's what fathers do. But now I saw the truth. He had forfeited that right with his greed. We also spoke about my modest savings, the accounts I had scraped together over the years. She showed me how to move them safely, how to ensure they were protected just like the house. "You've worked too hard to let anyone else drain you dry," she said. I nodded, my chest swelling with something between relief and resolve. By the end of the meeting, she had laid out a plan step by step. Sign the trust documents, transfer the deed, update the will, secure the accounts. Each step was a brick in the wall I was building, a fortress around the life they thought they could pillage. I left her office with the papers in a sealed envelope, tucked under my arm as though it were treasure. In truth, it was. For years, My treasure had been this house, these walls, this roof. They had tried to turn it into a prison, but now, with these documents, I was reclaiming it. At home, I acted the same as always. I kept my head bowed, answered their demands with silence, handed over the rent as though I had no choice. They didn't notice the envelope hidden in my drawer, didn't see the glimmer in my eyes when I looked at the house. Every nail, every board, every stone felt alive again, no longer a weight but a promise. In the quiet of my room, I unfolded the documents, running my fingers over the words, the signatures waiting for me. My name, still mine, my house, still mine, and soon it would be untouchable, locked away from their greedy hands. I whispered into the stillness, "This is the beginning." The words steadied me, filled me with a calm I hadn't felt in months. They had no idea what I was building in the shadows. They thought they had won, but I was laying the foundation of their downfall one signature at a time. Patience became my armor. Every morning I rose before dawn, pulled on the same threadbare clothes, and went to work as if nothing had changed. I handed over the envelopes of cash on the first of every month, just as they demanded, keeping my face blank, my voice subdued. To them, I was still the obedient father, too tired and too weak to resist. They mistook my silence for surrender, my compliance for defeat, but beneath that mask, gears were turning, steady and deliberate. I met with Ms. Keller in quiet corners of her office, reviewing each step of the plan. I signed documents with hands that trembled not from fear, but from the weight of what those signatures meant. I moved my savings into accounts they could not touch, established the trust that would hold my house like a fortress, and updated my will with cold precision. Each action was a stone placed carefully in the wall that would soon separate me from their grasp. At home, I carried on as though nothing was different. They sneered when I handed them the rent, laughing behind my back at how easily I complied. I overheard her once, gloating to a friend over the phone. "He just hands it over without a fight." Honestly, it's pathetic how easy he is to control. I pressed my ear to the door, my jaw tight, forcing myself to stay calm. They had no idea that with every payment, their arrogance was deepening the trap I had set for them. I kept up the act with methodical precision. When they boasted about their new purchases, luxury handbags, expensive electronics, fine wines, I nodded politely, as though I admired their success. When they spoke about future vacations they planned to fund with my labor, I smiled faintly, as if resigned. But inside, I was counting the days. I still worked the 3 jobs, dragging my body through exhaustion and humiliation, but now the suffering had a purpose. Every delivery I made, every floor I scrubbed, every box I hauled became another step toward freedom. I no longer thought of myself as a beaten man, but as a soldier marching quietly through a campaign. Endurance became my weapon. In the evenings, I sat alone in my room, the documents hidden carefully beneath the floorboard I had lifted with my own hands. Sometimes I would take them out, run my fingers across the embossed seals, and feel the power they carried. They were silent, but they spoke louder than my son's demands, louder than my daughter-in-law's cruel laughter. They told me the truth. I was not powerless. I was not at their mercy. I forced myself to replay their words in my mind, each insult fueling the resolve to stay the course. Old baggage, burden, pathetic. The cruelty hurt, but it also sharpened me. If they saw me as nothing more than money, then I would use money to crush their illusion of control. Patience required discipline. There were nights when I longed to reveal the truth, to throw the papers on the table and watch their faces crumble. But I knew the moment had not yet come. Timing was everything. They needed to believe completely in their power before I stripped it away. Only then would the humiliation be complete. So I played my part. I was the tired old man, bent beneath the weight of 3 jobs, grateful for a roof over my head. I smiled faintly when they tossed me scraps of false kindness. I nodded silently when they lectured me about responsibility. And all the while, the fortress grew stronger. In the quiet of those nights, as exhaustion tugged at my body, I found strength in the rhythm of patience. Each day brought me closer. Each payment was not a sign of defeat, but another brick in the foundation of their downfall. They believed they were winning, but in truth, they were digging their own graves. And as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I whispered to myself, "Wait, just wait." Because I knew the day was coming when patience would end and the storm would finally break. It didn't take long for their greed to grow teeth. At first, they were content with the rent $5,000, month after month, handed over without resistance. My silent compliance only emboldened them. They mistook my patience for surrender, and in their arrogance, they began to push harder. It started subtly. One evening at dinner, my son leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass, and said, "You know, Dad, costs have gone up. Groceries, electricity, everything. 5,000 doesn't stretch as far as it used to." I didn't look up from my plate. I simply nodded, as though I were too tired to argue. Inside, though, my chest tightened. They weren't satisfied. They would never be satisfied. A few days later, his wife cornered me in the hallway, her perfume cloying, her smile sharp. "We've been covering so many extras for you," she said smoothly, though her voice carried the edge of a blade. "It's only fair if you pitch in a little more. Maybe you could add another 500. After all, you don't want to be a burden, do you?" The word echoed again, burden. They wielded it like a weapon, certain it would break me down. I kept my face blank, my voice quiet, and said, "I'll see what I can do." She walked away smug, believing she had won another small victory. Soon, their demands multiplied. I overheard them in the living room one night, whispering about renovations they wanted to make. "If we can squeeze him for another 1,000, we can redo the kitchen," she said. My son laughed. "He'll pay. He always does." Their voices dripped with certainty, as if my obedience were a law of nature. They began to flaunt their purchases more openly, parading new clothes, new gadgets, new furniture through the house. My son bragged about booking a weekend getaway, and she showed off the diamond bracelet glinting on her wrist. Each time, they made a show of it, as though daring me to protest, mocking me with their extravagance. But the worst came one Saturday morning. I had just returned from the grocery store after a long shift, mopping floors, my body aching from bending and scrubbing. I set down the bag of discounted bread and milk I'd bought for myself when my son called out, "Dad, come here." He was sitting at the kitchen table with her beside him, a spread of papers laid out before them. They looked like royalty holding court, their expressions smug and expectant. "We've been looking at the numbers," my son said, tapping the papers with a pen. "If you really want to contribute fairly, rent needs to go up. 6,000 starting next month." My stomach clenched, but I kept my face still. He leaned forward, his voice firm. "We're not asking too much. You've been here rent-free for years. It's time you make up for it." His wife added quickly, her tone laced with mock concern, "We're only thinking of what's best for everyone. You wouldn't want us to struggle because you can't pull your weight, would you?" Her words were sugar-coated poison. Struggle. In their world of champagne dinners and weekend getaways, they dared to speak of struggle. I looked between them, my heart pounding, my palms damp. They expected me to crumble, to plead, to scrape together more hours, more humiliation, just to feed their greed. Instead, I nodded slowly. I understand. My voice was quiet, flat, exactly what they wanted to hear. Their shoulders relaxed, their smiles returned. They believed once again that they had broken me. But behind my calm, something colder tightened inside me. Each new demand only proved what I already knew. There was no bottom to their hunger. They would drain me until nothing remained if I allowed it. Their arrogance was building the stage for their own downfall, and I would let them. As I left the kitchen, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. My face was lined and tired, but my eyes held something different now. Not defeat, not despair, patience, resolve. They thought they saw weakness, but what they really saw was the mask I wore as I prepared to strip everything from them in one decisive strike. It was almost comical, the way arrogance blinded them. They strutted around the house I had built, the house still legally mine, speaking of it as if it were already theirs to do with as they pleased. I listened in silence as they planned futures written on the back of my sacrifices, their voices full of the confidence of people who believed they held all the cards. One evening, I walked past the living room and heard them talking excitedly. My daughter-in-law sat on the couch, flipping through a glossy real estate magazine, her manicured finger circling advertisements. "Can you imagine what we could get for this place if we sold it?" she said, her voice almost giddy. "The market is hot right now. Easily 500,000, maybe more." My son leaned over her shoulder, his smile smug. "More than that. With the location, the size, and if we fix up the kitchen and bathrooms a little, we could walk away with a fortune. Enough for a bigger house, closer to the city. Something modern, something that really shows our status." Status. That was the word that hung in the air, heavy and bitter. They weren't thinking of family, of legacy, of the love and sweat that had gone into every board and beam. They were thinking of status, of what my labor could buy them once they stripped it from me. She laughed then, tilting her head back, her bracelet sparkling in the light. "We should start planning. Imagine the parties we could host, the vacations we could take with the extra money. We'd finally be living the life we deserve, the life they deserved." My throat tightened at those words. What did they deserve, truly? Did they deserve the hours I spent breaking my body to provide? Did they deserve the sacrifices I made so they could walk across a stage in a cap and gown, so they could marry in a hall filled with chandeliers, so they could live in comfort while I worked myself to the bone? No, they deserved nothing of what I had built. And yet they sat there, mapping out the profit they would make from the home I had given my life to create. I leaned against the doorway, unseen, listening. My son pointed at a page in the magazine. "If we sell high, we could even invest. Maybe buy a rental property, flip houses. This place is just a stepping stone. We've got bigger plans. Just a stepping stone." My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth might crack. This house had been my life's work, the very ground on which I had built a family, and to him it was nothing but a rung on a ladder, something to discard once it had served its purpose. They spoke about the house the way vultures speak about a carcass, circling, greedy, blind to the fact that it was still mine. The irony was sharp enough to make me almost laugh. They were dreaming of selling what they didn't own, already counting the money in their heads, while the truth sat hidden in the trust documents locked away in my drawer. They didn't realize that every plan they made was nothing but air. Later that night I heard them again, this time in the kitchen. She was pouring wine, her voice dripping with arrogance. "When he's gone, it'll be so easy. We'll have the deed, we'll sell, and we'll finally get out of this outdated place. He probably thinks he'll live forever, but he's old. It won't be long." I felt the words like a knife, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I felt that cold resolve grow stronger. Let them dream. Let them make plans. Let them imagine the riches they would claim. Every boast, every laugh, every vision of their future only made the moment I would reveal the truth more satisfying. They believed they were clever, that they were already standing on the threshold of a life built on my back. But the truth was coming, steady and unstoppable. And when it arrived, their grand plans for selling my house would collapse like a castle built on sand. Silence became my companion. In the quiet of the guest room they had shoved me into, I sat alone night after night, reflecting on the path that had brought me here. The walls seemed to listen as I replayed every word they had spoken, every insult, every laugh. But instead of breaking me, the silence steadied me. It was in those hours, when the house slept and their arrogance no longer filled the air, that I rehearsed the moment that would one day come, the moment I would reveal the truth. I pictured it clearly, as though it were already real. The kitchen table, the same one I had built all those years ago, would become the stage for their downfall. I imagined placing the papers down before them, the trust documents, the will, the proof that the house and every dollar they had tried to bleed from me were beyond their reach. I could almost see their faces, the smugness slipping away, the dawning horror in their eyes as the truth took root. My son's jaw tightening, his wife's smile vanishing, replaced with panic. I saw myself sitting calmly, my voice steady as I said the words I had carried in my chest for months. "This house is mine. It always has been, and you will have nothing." I repeated those lines in my mind over and over, rehearsing them until they became second nature. Sometimes I whispered them aloud, testing the weight of each syllable. The words were not angry. They were final, absolute, delivered with the authority of a man who had endured enough. I wanted no shouting, no theatrics, just truth, spoken plainly, a blade sharper than any insult they had ever hurled at me. But beneath the calm of my rehearsal was a current of emotion I could not ignore. Heartbreak still pulsed inside me. The ache of knowing the boy I had raised had become the man who betrayed me. I thought often of the younger version of him running through the skeleton of this house, laughing, calling me Dad, with a joy that once filled me with pride. I asked myself in the silence, where had that boy gone? When had he vanished, replaced by this hollow shell of greed and entitlement? The questions never had answers, but I let them come, because each one reminded me why the truth needed to be revealed. The silence gave me space to sharpen my resolve. I practiced control, learning to hide every flicker of satisfaction when they spoke of selling the house, when they gloated about their future plans. I trained myself to stay blank, to let them believe they still held power. Every time I nodded and handed over rent, I reminded myself patience. Every time I heard them laugh at my expense, I thought, soon. Some nights, exhaustion threatened to break me. My body ached from the endless work, from the grind of 3 jobs, but even in the weariness, the fire inside me burned steady. I would sit at the edge of the bed, holding the documents in my hands, and I would breathe deeply, steadying myself. The papers felt like armor, proof that the truth was already on my side. All that remained was the reveal. In those hours, I came to understand something important. Revenge was not about anger. Anger had nearly consumed me, but it was silence, patience, and resolve that forged my strength. What I wanted was not a scream or a fight. What I wanted was to stand in the house I had built, look them in the eye, and watch their illusions collapse. I wanted the satisfaction of knowing that the power they thought they had was nothing but smoke. So I rehearsed, again and again, until my words were sharp as glass, until my resolve was immovable. The silence that had once wounded me had become my greatest ally, a space where my plan took shape, where my will hardened into iron. They had no idea what was coming. They still believed I was broken. But in truth, I was stronger than ever. And soon, very soon, the silence would end and the truth would speak for itself. The time for silence was nearing its end. I could feel it like a pulse beneath my skin, steady and insistent. I had waited patiently, endured humiliation, listened to their cruelty, all while building the wall of protection they never saw coming. Now it was time to set the stage. The confrontation had to be on my terms, in my house, at my table, with them sitting across from me believing they still held the upper hand. I wanted them confident, smug, certain that I was about to beg for mercy. Only then would the truth cut deepest. I chose my moment carefully. One evening, as they lounged in the living room with glasses of wine, I stepped in quietly, my posture stooped, my voice calm. "I need to talk to both of you," I said, letting just enough weariness seep into my tone to keep up the act. "It's about the finances. I think we need to sit down and discuss everything." Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing with curiosity, while his expression shifted into something close to satisfaction. "Finally," he muttered, setting his glass down with a heavy clink. She smiled sweetly, but I saw the greed flash behind her eyes. "Of course," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "It's about time we had a serious discussion. I told them we would meet the following Saturday evening at the kitchen table. I made it sound as if I needed guidance, as if I was ready to confess my struggles and hand over whatever control I had left. They agreed eagerly, though they tried to hide it, their excitement barely contained. I saw it in the way my son's lips twitched upward, in the way she leaned closer to him, whispering about sorting things out once and for all. The week crawled by, each day a mixture of grueling work and quiet preparation. At night, I sat in my room and went over the documents again and again, rehearsing how I would reveal them. I laid them out in neat piles, the trust agreement, the updated deed, the will that cut them out entirely. Each page was a weapon sharper than any blade, and I memorized every line, every signature. I imagined their reactions, the way they would shift from smug certainty to shock, from shock to rage, and finally to the dawning realization that they had lost everything. I rehearsed my words again, calm and steady, never raising my voice. I wanted the truth itself to do the cutting, not my anger. When Saturday came, I woke early. My body ached from the week's labor, but my mind was clear. I polished the kitchen table with slow, deliberate movements, as though preparing an altar. On its surface, I placed nothing yet, leaving it bare for the moment when I would lay down the truth like a hammer. They arrived right on time. Of course, they lived here, after all, but they entered the kitchen as if they were guests of honor. She wore a crisp blouse and her diamond bracelet sparkling under the light. He carried a folder of his own, full of notes and calculations no doubt meant to justify raising my rent even higher. Their confidence was palpable. "Dad," my son began, pulling out a chair as though he were the one hosting, "we're glad you finally came around. This conversation is long overdue." She nodded, her smile wide and false. "Yes, we've been worried about you. It's important to plan these things properly. We can help you sort everything out." I nodded, keeping my face neutral, my voice low. "That's exactly why I wanted this meeting. It's time to put everything in order." They sat across from me, leaning forward eagerly, their folders ready, their pens poised. They thought I was about to surrender, to admit defeat, to place my future in their greedy hands. But beneath the table, my hand rested on the envelope in my lap, the documents that would turn their certainty to ash. The stage was set. They had no idea that this meeting, arranged under the guise of finances, would be the moment their power shattered. And as I looked at them across the table, my heart steady, I thought to myself, let them think they've won. The truth will destroy them soon enough. The air in the kitchen that evening felt heavy, charged, as though even the walls knew what was about to happen. They sat across from me, side by side, their folders open, pens ready, faces full of smug confidence. My son tapped the table with his finger, impatient. "So, Dad," he began, his tone already condescending, "let's get this sorted. If you're ready to admit you can't keep up, we can take over managing things. It'll be easier for everyone." His wife leaned in, her smile tight but triumphant. "Yes, we've drawn up some figures. We think it's best if your rent goes up to $7,000 starting next month. That way, you're really pulling your weight, and we can finally move forward with plans for renovations. We're doing this for your benefit, of course." I let their words hang in the air, my face calm, my hands folded neatly on the table. For a moment, I simply looked at them, my silence drawing out longer and longer until they shifted uncomfortably. Finally, I reached down and placed my envelope on the table with deliberate care. Their eyes followed it, confusion flickering across their expressions. "What's that?" my son asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. I slid the envelope toward them, my voice steady, almost gentle. "These are the documents that make your plans irrelevant." He frowned, glancing at her before pulling the papers out. His eyes skimmed the first page, then froze. I saw it happen, the slight widening of his eyes, the twitch in his jaw. She leaned closer, snatching the second page, scanning it quickly. Her smile faltered, the color draining from her face. "This," my son stammered, flipping through the papers, his voice rising, "this says the house is in a trust that it doesn't belong to." He stopped himself, his lips pressing into a thin line. I leaned forward, my voice calm, measured. "The house is mine, legally. It always has been. And now it is protected in a trust, which means you cannot sell it, you cannot touch it, and when I am gone, it will not pass to you. You will inherit nothing." Her eyes snapped up to meet mine, fury burning in them. "You can't do this," she hissed. "I already have," I replied, my tone unwavering. I pointed to the signatures, the seals, the legal language they could not twist with arrogance. "Every page has been reviewed, notarized, filed. You thought you could bleed me dry, but the truth is, you never had power here. Not over me, not over this house." My son's face reddened, his voice breaking into a shout. "We've been carrying you, paying for everything, and this is how you repay us?" I shook my head slowly. "You've carried nothing. Every nail in these walls, every board, every brick, I built them with my own hands. Every dollar you spent came from my labor. And still, you mocked me, called me a burden, an old man, pathetic. You treated me like a tenant in my own home. That ends tonight." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. They stared at the papers, their dreams of profit unraveling before their eyes. She finally slammed the documents back on the table, her voice sharp with desperation. "This isn't fair. We deserve." "Deserve?" I interrupted, my voice firm, cold. "You deserve nothing. Family is not about greed. It is not about exploitation. And you proved long ago that you are not family in any way that matters." AGLO. For once, they had no comeback. They sat there, faces twisted with shock and rage, powerless against the weight of the truth lying between us. I had envisioned this moment for months, rehearsed it in the silence of my room, and now it was real. The power they believed was theirs had dissolved in an instant, replaced by the undeniable reality of my control. I gathered the papers back into the envelope, tucking them under my arm. My voice was calm as I stood. "This conversation is over. The house is mine. It always was, and now it always will be." And with that, I walked away, leaving them sitting at the table, their arrogance shattered, their illusions burned to ash. The silence after I walked away lasted only a breath before it shattered. My son's voice rose behind me, sharp, furious, echoing off the walls I had built. "You can't do this. You can't just cut us out." His chair scraped violently against the floor as he leapt to his feet. I turned slowly, envelope still under my arm, and looked at him. For the first time, I saw not a man but a child throwing a tantrum, stomping his feet because the toy he wanted was no longer his. His wife stood too, her face twisted with rage, her voice shrill. "We've sacrificed everything for you. We've let you stay here out of the goodness of our hearts. And this is how you repay us? By humiliating us?" Her words dripped with venom, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her panic. I said nothing. Silence, I had learned, was a sharper weapon than any argument. My calmness only fueled their fury. "You're old," my son shouted, jabbing a finger at me. "You can't keep this up forever. Who's going to take care of you when you can't work anymore? You think your little papers are going to protect you then? You'll come crawling back to us, begging, and maybe we'll help you if you're lucky." I stood still, my expression steady, letting his words hang in the air. Inside, though, I felt the cold certainty of victory. His threats were hollow now, stripped of power by the truth sealed in that envelope. She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing into slits. "You think you're clever, but you'll regret this. We'll find a way around it. We always do. You can't just shut us out." I finally spoke, my voice low but cutting. "You already shut yourselves out. With your greed, with your cruelty, with every word you spoke when you thought I wasn't listening. You made yourselves strangers in this house, and strangers inherit nothing." Her face went pale, the words striking deeper than she expected. She looked at my son for support, but he was unraveling, pacing back and forth like a trapped animal. "This isn't fair," he repeated, his voice cracking now, desperation replacing anger. "We were counting on this. You owe us." The word echoed in the kitchen, "owe." I almost laughed at the irony. I owed them nothing. Not after a lifetime of giving, of bending, of sacrificing everything I had so they could live comfortably. They stood there now, furious, powerless, their arrogance collapsing in on itself. I moved toward the stairs, my footsteps measured, deliberate. Behind me, their shouting grew louder, their words harsher. "You'll regret this, old man," she screeched. "You'll die alone in this house, and no one will care." My son's voice joined hers, a cacophony of rage and fear. But underneath it all, I heard the truth in their voices, the sound of panic, of realization that the future they had built in their heads was gone. I paused at the base of the stairs and turned once more, my eyes meeting theirs. "You've taken enough from me. That ends now. You can scream, you can threaten, but it changes nothing. You have no power here anymore." My words were calm, but I saw them flinch as though struck. I climbed the stairs slowly, their shouts following me, but each step felt lighter than the last. For months I had carried the weight of their cruelty on my shoulders, but now it was gone, crumbling with their arrogance. They were left exposed, humiliated in the house they thought they controlled, stripped of the illusion of power they had wielded so mercilessly. In my room, I closed the door against the sound of their anger. I placed the envelope back beneath the floorboard and sat quietly, letting the storm of their voices rage below. Their humiliation was complete, not because I shouted louder, not because I fought harder, but because I had shown them the truth. They had built their arrogance on a foundation of lies, and with a few pieces of paper, I had reduced it all to dust. And in the silence of my room, I let out a long breath. The battle was over. The humiliation was theirs to carry now, not mine. For the first time in what felt like years, I woke to silence that was not heavy with despair. It was calm, almost soothing, like a balm on wounds that had been raw for too long. The shouts from the night before had faded into bitter mutters, muffled through the walls, but I no longer cared. Their words, their cruelty, their arrogance, none of it had power over me anymore. The weight that had bent my shoulders, that had kept me awake at night, replaying their insults, was gone. In its place was something steady and unshakable: dignity. I stood by the window of the guest room, the early sun spilling across the floorboards I had laid with my own hands. I pressed my palm against the wall, feeling the cool surface, and for the first time in months, it didn't feel like a cage. It felt like mine again. This house, my life's work, was no longer a prison held over me by their greed. It was my sanctuary, my fortress, untouchable and secure. I thought back to all the nights I had lain awake, asking myself if I was truly a burden, if I had become nothing more than old baggage to the people I loved most. Those words had haunted me, cutting deeper than any blade. But now, with the trust document signed, with the will written in my own hand, I realized those words were lies. I was not baggage. I was not weak. I was a man who had built something from nothing, who had given without measure, and who had endured cruelty without breaking. I was still standing, and that, I knew, was strength they could never match. When I passed them in the hallway later that morning, they avoided my eyes. My son muttered something about leaving for work, though I knew his voice was tight with shame. She brushed past me, her perfume sharp, her face pale and tight. Neither of them dared to bring up rent or bills or money. The silence between us was louder than any argument, and in that silence I felt vindicated. They knew. They knew the truth now, and the knowledge alone was enough to keep them quiet. I carried myself differently in the days that followed. My steps were slower, steadier, not weighed down by humiliation but guided by peace. When I left for work, I no longer felt the same crushing despair. The jobs were still hard, the exhaustion still real, but the purpose had shifted. I was no longer working just to hand everything over to them. I was working for myself, to keep my independence, to maintain the dignity they had tried to strip from me. Every dollar I earned was mine again, untangled from their greed. At night, I would sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, the same table where they once demanded more and more, and I would look around the house. I saw not betrayal, but survival. Every beam, every wall, every corner reminded me of the man. I was the man who had built this home, who had given his family everything, and who had taken back control when they tried to destroy him. Vindication did not come with shouting or spectacle. It came quietly, in the knowledge that I had endured, that I had risen above their cruelty and reclaimed what was mine. They still lived under my roof, still walked the halls I had built, but the power dynamic had shifted entirely. No matter what words they muttered behind closed doors, they knew the truth. They were powerless, and I was free. I realized then that revenge is not always about destruction. Sometimes it is about restoration, about reclaiming the dignity that others tried to take, about standing tall in the face of those who sought to make you small. My son and his wife had tried to chain me with greed, to reduce me to nothing more than a source of money. But in the end, it was they who were shackled, bound by their own arrogance, while I walked free in the home I had built with my own 2 hands. And in that freedom, I finally found peace. The storm had passed. I felt it in the air each morning when I stepped outside, the chill no longer biting into me with the weight of despair. The jobs were still there, the early deliveries, the long shifts, the late-night drives, but they no longer felt like chains. They were choices now. Mine to make, mine to endure. I was working only for myself, not to line their pockets, not to feed their endless hunger. Each paycheck that slid into my hands carried a different weight. It was no longer stolen, no longer tainted. It was mine. And that simple truth filled me with a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. The house stood solid around me, no longer a battlefield, no longer a cage. It was intact, untouchable, sealed within the trust I had signed. Every night, as I closed my eyes, I knew it would remain mine until the day I chose otherwise. Their voices no longer had power here. They had tried to claim it as their own, to treat it as a stepping stone toward some grander life, but their illusions had crumbled. Now they walked the halls quietly, subdued, their arrogance gone, and I, for the first time in decades, felt at peace within these walls. I moved through the rooms differently now. When I ran my hand along the banister, I felt pride instead of bitterness. When I stood in the kitchen, I no longer saw the scene of my humiliation, but the table where I had reclaimed my power. When I sat in the living room, I remembered the nights I built this house beam by beam, and I thought, this is mine, always mine. Their betrayal could never take that away. Peace didn't mean forgetting. I still carried the scars of their cruelty, the memory of being called old baggage, a burden, pathetic, but those words no longer cut me open. They had become reminders, proof of what I had endured, proof of how far I had risen above them. In a strange way, their cruelty had forged something stronger in me. Without their betrayal, I might never have discovered the quiet strength that now steadied my soul. I thought often of my wife, of what she might have said if she were still here. I imagined her smile, her gentle hand on my shoulder, telling me she always knew I was stronger than I believed. The memory comforted me, warmed me, as though she was still walking beside me through the house we built together. Sometimes, at night, I would sit on the porch and watch the world go by. The stars overhead, the quiet hum of the neighborhood, the soft creak of the chair beneath me, all of it spoke of a calm I had thought I would never know again. I would sip my tea and think about the long road that had led here, the sacrifices, the betrayals, the long nights of humiliation and exhaustion. And then the turning point, the cold resolve, the patience, the plan, each step had brought me to this place, this moment of resolution. They still lived under my roof for now, but their presence no longer unsettled me. They avoided me, spoke little, their eyes darting away whenever I entered the room. They were shadows of the arrogant people they once were, stripped of power, left only with the consequences of their greed. And I had reclaimed myself, my dignity, my peace. The truth was simple. I was free, free from their demands, free from their cruelty, free from the weight they had tried to chain around my neck. I worked for myself now. I lived for myself now. The house remained, solid and unbroken, a monument not to betrayal but to survival, to strength, to the spirit that refused to die. As I sat quietly in the home I had built, a calm settled over me that I had not felt in years. The war was over, the house was intact, my spirit was restored, and though scars remained, I carried them not as wounds, but as proof that I had endured and that I had won. Your time means a lot. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, just click the box on the left.